Hi, I'm Britton LaRue, and this is Moon to Moon. Moon to Moon is a space to consider, celebrate, and share the ways we come home to ourselves, anchor through change, and uncover our power. 1 month, one phase, one loving step at a time. Dear Moon to Moon, it's Britton. I just had such a fun conversation that I'm so excited to share with you with Alison Marie Dale, who I've been following since the spring in Instagram and absolutely loving her content. I reached out to Alison a couple of months ago by DM and just said, can you please come on to Moon to Moon and share about your perspective, because she weaves together and synthesizes many modalities, many of which I adore, such as astrology, human design, and the pagan wheel of the year. And she does these forecasts, these weekly forecasts with the astrology that also then focus on the gate in the human design body graph where the sun is transiting through in that particular week, in that particular sign. And then when you expand on that gate and you can explore and contemplate the invitations and the stories connected to that gate, where it is in the body graph, what the themes are, and then it goes layer upon layer upon layer, depending on how nerdy you want to be with human design. It really deepens your relationship to both human design and astrology. And anyone who's been following my work for a while knows that I'm a synthesizer. I love weaving things together. I love it when what one shares is being woven from this passion place of how it's helping you. And that's what Allison's doing for herself. And that is so inspiring to me. So Allyson came on. Did I just say Ashley? Allyson just came on and is going to be sharing with you how she weaves the study of the sun's transits around the sky, the wheel of the year, to looking at the different gates in the body graph of human design and how this can be supportive to you. And we also just chat a bunch about astrology and human design and big transits and how we came into our mystical middle lives, and overall just had a really great time. So if you're new to human design, I'm inviting you to come explore. We do aim in the conversation to define the things that we mean. And also, we're both very passionate and nerdy about what we care about. So there are times when the language may go over your head, or you may feel lost, or you may feel like you can't follow like the reference or can't follow the joke that, we thought was so funny. And just inviting you to be compassionate with yourself as a learner. Just focus on being open and curious and trusting that things are landing based on resonance. And I'm going to be including in the show notes lots of links for you to go find your body graph and for you to go learn about the different gates, including the gates as told through the gene keys modality or methodology, which is related to human design, and we talk about it here. So that if this piques your interest and gets you excited and you want to go do more learning, inviting you to just begin jumping down rabbit holes, and inviting you also to connect with Allyson through her podcast and through her Instagram. Connect with her for a reading, because she can support you in fast tracking your understanding of what she's synthesizing the more you connect with her. So thank you so much to Allyson for coming and exploring what's lighting you up. Another thing I really love that Allyson's doing is just very openly sharing what she's passionate about as she's learning it, and being open about the fact that she's a learner and is like not professing to be an expert. And everything that she's sharing is coming from like the edges of her learning process, which really resonates for me because that is how I see my work coming from. So really just admire her audacity in creating a podcast that is super emergent with her interests, and her willingness to come and talk to Moon listeners from that place of emergent passion and learning. So thank you, Allyson, and to everyone listening, I'm wishing you a beautiful, beautiful Sagittarius season. Welcome to Moon, Alison Marie Dale.
Thank you so much for having me here, Britton. So excited to talk to you.
Yes, we were just reminiscing, like, how did we get connected? And it was in Heretic Haven.
Yes.
With Kelsey, Tortorice, and Allyson. What's her last name? Forseth.
Yeah.
Moon to Moon listeners may remember the Fifth Line Experience podcast episode, and that's one of my highest, most listened to in 2024, actually.
Oh, wow.
And so soon after we recorded that, me and Kelsey, I hopped in, and it was for folks who have the 5 in their profile. And we both do. I'm a 3-5, and you're saying you're a 5-1.
I'm a 5-1.
And so I guess probably through the Instagram shared space, I probably just followed you, and then I started to lock into the things that you were sharing. Like, wait, who is this? What is she talking about? Because I feel so much wisdom that comes through your posts. And I especially love the fact that you're a synthesizer. Like, I think of myself as a synthesizer, weaving together different modalities and wisdom traditions. And the way you were, I'm obsessed with cycle. And I also approach, like you, the wheel of the astrology through the wheel of the year. But to hear you to weave in the gates of human design to the way you were just speaking to the week by week of the forecasts, that was just started to blow my mind, because I'm a student of human design. I'm not like someone that can hold space for somebody else reading their body graph, but I'm pretty obsessed with it. So thanks for coming to talk about your work. I would love to just begin by learning some more about you. Like, how did you come into this synthesis of different modalities that you bring? And just feel free to take up space telling your story and how you started the Cycles of Time podcast and your work.
Amazing. Well, yeah, thank you so much for having me here. I've been a fan I think I discovered you through Jonathan Coe, who I was in, I think my first formal astrology training, he was in my class with Sabrina Monarch.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure that I found
love love this. Jonathan and I are both March 4th.
Oh, you are. That's so cool. Okay. So that's I'm September 8th, so we have opposite human design
Close.
signs.
Yeah.
Yeah, opposite. Where you're in the gate of doubt, you and him, I guess, and I'm in the
Mhm.
gate of confusion. So that's
Amazing.
where the synthesis comes from. We're like, hey, there's all this stuff. What are we doing? And it's like complete. Yeah, it's also known as imagination, but it's about kind of like coming up with like, hey, what about that? And then anyway. But so yeah,
Mhm.
that I found you through him, I'm pretty sure, and was just really obsessed with the way that you were bringing shame into the conversation, and because I felt like I had such a long unshaming process when it came to even admitting that I was into astrology at all. But I've been into it since I was little. I've been witchy since I was a very little kid because I grew up in the high desert of New Mexico and Santa Fe and had a
Oh, wow.
relationship with the stars and the earth in the way that kind of seeing the seasons change in a really distinct and dramatic way here. We have four very distinct seasons. And so I saw kind of early on how the astrology, how the zodiac related to these changing seasons in the way that the Wheel of the Year, or the Pagan Wheel of the Year, talks about it a little bit more explicitly. But then for a long time, probably from, yeah, I mean, probably from high school all the way through when I was like 35, I went a very different direction. I was like, I should be doing X, Y, or Z. And I moved to cities and became a tech person and, was like, I need to become successful in this certain way. And so I lost a lot of that connection. And I kind of also growing up in Santa Fe, there's a lot of, quote unquote, woo people here. Like, and as a kid, there was a lot of like, I had a chip on my shoulder about it because it was like, well, I don't want to be like those, like, crystal Reiki chakra people who like are just all around me because I want to be taken more seriously somehow. It was a very deep, like I shamed them. I felt a certain shame in having any interest in that kind of stuff. And
Mhm.
so I just love discovering your direct verbiage around shame and how it started to help me unpeel. Around 2020 when I really started getting deeply, deeply into all of this because a lot more time with the pandemic and everything. Yeah, I think I might have been following you then or a little bit after and really resonated with unshaming just your desire and your interest and passion. So yeah, just wanted to thank you for helping me along this journey.
I love it. And I may invite you to check out. There's an episode called Unshaming Your Woo that I did with Natasha Levenger, who's an
Oh,
energy healer and my dear friend.
awesome.
Like specifically on like unshaming the woo. Um,
That's great. I'll have to listen.
it is really funny to think about like coming from Dallas, Texas. I would go to Santa Fe just like, ugh. If only I could live in a place like this, I could be more free. But it's just the perspective of where you are and trying to figure out your identity from within it.
Right.
Have-
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I moved back here in 2020, right when the pandemic, right when the lockdown was declared. And so I was kind of coming back. I'd been in the Bay Area for about 14 years or so. And yeah, kind of I started a tech company there, working with nonprofits and through some art shows before that, and like lived the big city life and kind of chasing the dream as far as just like what success meant to me. But then when I landed back here in 2020, I was like, there was just this sudden reconnection with the stars and the constellations and the kind of turning of the earth and the ability to see that. And I was really just profoundly taken and feel really lucky that I got to have that much time to pay attention to it when the world slowed down a little bit and to just say, okay, wow, like this is something that I shouldn't be ashamed of at all. Like the connection to the cycles of our bodies, the cycles of the planet, the cycles of however you want to look at it. Cycles are a deeply profound way of looking at not only time, but at life. I mean, the way life works. And I became a mother, had my daughter in 2018, and she just celebrated her sixth birthday. And so I think about the cycle, like becoming aware of my body when I was pregnant in a whole new way, and kind of the cycles of life and death and just, how you grow an organ, you grow a placenta during this time to support this being. And I just became like deeply aware of how my body was kind of part of this earth. And because I didn't, no matter what I did or thought or had in my mind, I couldn't control what my body was going to do. It just knew what to do. And so it's been this really big return over the past few years to both my kind of embodiment and the earth and the stars as well. And so I'm like, how could I have ever felt ashamed of that? It seems so silly, but there's a huge, yeah, like I wanted to be taken seriously as a young person when I was in my 20s and 30s. And I thought if I mentioned I was interested in astrology, people would be like, oh, and I would have to explain every detail of why it's logically, rationally right. So it's been just a beautiful homecoming to the cycles.
Yay. Do you associate these changes with any particular astrology?
Absolutely. I think that's what really, I mean, I'm talking about not needing to, I don't believe you should need to prove astrology by any means. I think that it's
Yeah.
a personal relationship, but when it does prove itself, sometimes it's like, haha, okay. Like there's no denying that that is just like the truth. And for me, that was the Saturn Pluto conjunction in Capricorn in January, I believe January of 2020.
Mhm.
That a lot of stuff I was kind of seeing writing on the wall in 2019. It felt like things were just like a little bit off compared to how I thought they were going to go in my life. Just kind of like, oh, well, I'm just keeping on, keeping on. And I felt like I look back at 2019 and I'm like, I had just had massive blinders on, like intentionally. I think I just put them on and was like, okay, cool. I want to just keep doing this. I'm deep enough into my current life that I had a husband and a baby and a business, and I was, a nice luxury apartment overlooking a lake. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, this is my life and it's going to be that way for a while. But I started painting a lot more that year, and like stuff that was coming through my paintings were really kind of apocalyptic actually. And I was like, that's weird, but maybe that's just some subconscious stuff. And then January 2020 on the Saturn Pluto conjunction, I don't know, pretty much my whole life just kind of fell apart in I went through a divorce after that. I left the business that I had spent about a decade building. And meanwhile, I had a 6-month-old baby at that time. So it was just this kind of like, oh, everything needs to change and everything is changing. And I had no idea that we didn't know about COVID-19 at that point. But a couple months later, I had my date set to move back to New Mexico. And it happened to be the day that they locked down like the whole country. It was on a St. Patrick's Day. And I remember San Francisco was like, okay, lockdown, nothing is open. And so it was like this really karmic feeling, plutonic type of thing that was like, oh, hello. And Pluto and Saturn were conjunct in the sky, and they're also conjunct in my birth chart on my IC. So it was like, oh, my home, a
Wow.
sense of place. It's just all being kind of uprooted in a very dramatic way that a square can bring. And of course, Pluto squares last for like years because such slow moving planet. So I've been in that Pluto square, Saturn square energy for a while. And it's really, I'm just so grateful for it because it's helped me uncover um, the deeper truths that are hiding under the surface and, stop me from living in that kind of like blinders on superficial way. So thanks, Pluto.
Mm. Wow. I don't know if you know that, like everything kind of broke down for me very quickly. Was it like small change, small change, small change, small change, slowly over time? It was everything all at once.
I think
Sounds
I've heard a bit of
similar
that.
to you.
Yeah. Yeah. I've resonated a lot with your story, the parts of it that I've heard as far as just coming to astrology much later in life, or, I'm 41. I think, I don't know how old you are, but in your 40s,
46.
right? 46. Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, and just this kind of like awakening out of like, oh, I thought I knew what I was doing and what I should be doing. And, business or academia or whatever. And this kind of like, and then all of a sudden, yeah, there's this massive unveiling of like that deeper desire and purpose.
Yeah. And, as intense as it was, like I look back, I'm sure you probably do too. And you're like, how did I move through all that?
Yeah,
Well, I know how I did, like through the cycles.
amazing. Yeah.
Right.
Moon to moon. Yeah.
The lunar cycle, the lunar cycle.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there is, I feel like a liberation in just like going ahead and like let's just cut all these cords, like because then there weren't parts of me kind of holding on to maintaining something. It was just like dissolving and letting go of um what it had been. And then that openness, you can be such a good listener.
Mm. Yeah. To yourself, to the world around you. Yeah.
Hmm.
Right. When you have that I mean, I think of the death card in tarot and the association with Pluto and yeah, just kind of how like when you are holding on to one of those threads, even if it's just one small one, it's like tethering you to that demon or devil that's there, and you could actually just take the whole thing off and be like, I'm free now. But I think it's so tempting to have like, oh well, but there's just this one reason I can't do be interested in the thing that I really want to be interested in or do the thing I really want to do because that one little thread is like the excuse that keeps you coming back.
Hmm. Yeah. So did you find human design in the last 4 years then?
It was also around, yeah, I think right around the time my daughter was born, I had been working like 80-hour weeks for about a decade doing, tech startup life. And it was fulfilling in some ways. And then I felt like, okay, we're helping people, it was helping nonprofits with fundraising and kind of supporter engagement. And I felt like, okay, societally, like this feels like a pat on the back. And also I feel, good about being an entrepreneur and all of the stuff, but I was just burning out. I was working so much. And so when I was able to take parental leave and gave myself some actual time, I discovered human design when I was pregnant and was like, ooh, because I remember having studied around that time with Sabrina Monarch getting in. I was like, I really want to study astrology as this will be a fun thing that I asked for as like a present as a class in astrology to go a little deeper. And then soon after that, a friend of mine told me about human design, just kind of, oh, have you heard of this human design thing? And I was like, no, but she bought me a reading and I found out I was a projector and a 5/1 and that I had G center authority. So like my personal
Uh-huh.
identity is and I need to like speak my truth to hear my truth. It has to be like spoken out loud. And so those were like the three tidbits from this report that I picked up on. I was like, whoa, this is actually really helpful in the day to day. Like I've known I'm a Virgo my whole life, and that can feel simultaneously like, yeah, cool, helpful, and also shame filled in other ways, right? I'm, having to be like, oh, but I'm not that nitpicky and I'm not that fastidious, or. So I think
Yes.
that because there was so much of the like cosmopolitan horoscope kind of like way that people think about astrology, I did have the shame surrounding it. And human design came in as like kind of just out of left field and was like, I know nothing about this, don't know anything about where it came from, and I don't have any reference, but these kind of archetypical things that are coming through are super fascinating, like projector, huh? And my
Hmm.
ex-partner was a projector too, but he was a splenic projector. And it explains so much like our authority, like how we made decisions. He made decisions really quickly and changed on a whim and kind of had this like almost like primal way of just like changing course. And I was like, had to hear things spoken out through my voice and through other voices to understand them. And this was becoming a point of contention in our relationship. And then I saw it just on paper, like, this is why. This is some answer that explains that in this deep way. And it really made me kind of want to dig deeper.
Wow. Yeah. So I know I think it's really interesting to talk to people who love astrology about like what human design has done to the worldview, like once you have that, like it does shift how you feel about astrology in a way, you know?
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like it's so funny when you think that things are so closely linked that they're going to have like a friendship and there's going to be a lot of cross-pollination. That's how I always see it. I'm like, yes, this is going to be just an expansion of my astrology knowledge. But I have found that there's very much like siloed communities when it comes to astrology and human
Hmm.
design. And, I think a lot of astrologers that I follow are really into mythology and kind of like history and like more poetic understanding. And I've gone to human design conferences where everyone is literally speaking in numbers, where they're like, oh, the 2242, and then they're like, they're like all the channels and they know what they are and they're talking to it. It's almost like they're speaking in like a completely foreign language. That I was like, whoa, that is really, kind of wild. Because when I first started it, I didn't know what these channels meant and all these numbers meant at all. And so, but I feel like when I ask people on either side what they think about the other one, they don't see how similar they actually are. Like there's not there's not a translation body, or like there's not that much because it's a fairly new system as far as how they can be translated. And so they end up being kind of like opposed in some certain ways. Like, oh yeah, that informs, astrology informs human design, but like it stops at a certain point. And I actually don't believe that. I think they're fully integrated systems that I'm excited to see like over time how they become more collaborative.
Hmm. Yeah, for me, I also had this experience of like, I think because I found astrology first when I was coming out, like through a Neptune haze, because I had Neptune on my sun, and a lot of my early adulthood was marked by a lot of like confusion and haziness. So speaking of gates of doubt and confusion, um, I tended to heavily identify with my birth chart's Pisces 12th house.
Mm,
Um, but when you look at my body, when I got to know my body graph, I have seven of the nine centers defined.
mm,
And it's like a very, I guess you could use the word strong in terms of like, whoa, like there's like a lot of definition in this chart, this
yeah.
body graph. Also a lot happening to the throat. And it made me more aware of like basically my Aries rising Capricorn moon, kind of almost like malefic aspects of
Mm,
like being a more boundaried kind of this is how I do things person.
cool. Cool. Yeah.
And brought those more forward into like my self-concept. That's to me how I think about the way knowing my body graph has helped me understand my chart more, is like actually give more attention to my ascendant and
Mm.
my angular houses
I love
being
that.
cardinal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Right. Because it's so easy to relate to just to kind of selectively choose. Yeah, I relate to this, but not that. Or, like I relate to the
mhm.
sun, but all those other things or whatever, And then when you do see it kind of combined into a picture, like I think human design really hooked me when I saw this picture because I've done art for a very long time that is like about brains. I'll show you on my wall actually real quick. It's like these are some art pieces I've done
Oh
years
yeah.
ago that are like they kind of look like the body graphs. And these were done like
Uh-huh.
16 years ago, like way before I found human design. So when I saw that there was this like chart of the body in that way, I was like, wow, this is cool. It looks like something I'd make a collage out of, But like,
Hmm.
well, 'cause I liked yeah, just I am an embodied person. My moon is in gate 46, which is the gate of kind of embodiment and determination of the self. And so it's
Oh.
about like my emotional side. When I found that out, I was like, oh yeah, cool. Like feeling things in my body really opens things up for me. But
Mm.
yeah, it's interesting. I interviewed somebody for this week's Cycles of Time podcast who is a very powerful like astrology chart, like stellium of planets in the 11th house in Scorpio and like Sun, Mercury, Uranus, like just midheaven, just like super power. And I see her as this force of nature, but I did her body graph and found out she was a reflector. And it like threw me.
Fascinating.
I was like, no way, that's so interesting. How is that possible? But it was like, it helped me see her in this way that she's a friend who lives on like very remote mesa in New Mexico for a large chunk of the time, but then can go into a city and just like, do all the things, like all the conferences, keynotes, concerts, like rock climbing, just like bam, 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 but then like can live in a very like reflective place too. And so I was like, oh, that the combination of those two things made it so an interesting reading, I guess.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
it really it just deepens things so much to bring human design in. And my guess is that a lot of listeners to Moon that are into human design, but it's probably less than like say the percentage of folks that are into astrology. That would be like a fun statistic to try to gather. But yeah, I think it would be helpful for those who are at the early stages of learning human design to also to hear a little bit of the technical around like because we're going to be looking at Sagittarius
Mhm.
2024 and the gates that the sun moves through. Maybe just defining like what a gate is and
Yeah,
giving a little bit of like a scaffolding for those that are at the beginning of learning.
definitely. So let's see where to begin. I I think about, so like the way I describe it when I do these posts about like the six gates of Scorpio season, the six gates of
Mhm.
Sagittarius season, is I have this little card that basically says like most of us slice the year up, like the wheel of the year, into four seasons. And so that's something that we understand pretty innately, that we have spring, summer, fall, winter. And that's like a way that most people around the world slice up the year. But in astrology, you're basically slicing the year up into 12 pieces, which are zodiac signs. And in the human design wheel of the year, the year is sliced up into 64 gates, is what they're called. So they're
Yes.
basically like a micro, I think of a Scorpio season as a season, and then each gate is a micro season of that time of the year, like of that
Oh,
season.
I love this. Okay.
So that kind of, it was the way I found to like make it most accessible to understand. It's just like a certain way of dividing the year up into a section that has meaning. And the 64 gates come from the I Ching, the ancient Chinese book of changes. And so Rao Huruhu, who's the founder, kind of channeler of the system of human design, kind of came up with the system in the 80s on Ibiza. He had like some kind of a vision bender. I don't know what's going on in Ibiza at that time, but there was definitely something. And he put together like, yeah, the Hindu Brahman chakra system with the zodiac, with the I Ching, with the Kabbalah tree of life, and became this whole interconnected system that when I first read about it, I was like, whoa. Oh, and quantum physics is in there. Like it's, and like the genetic codon. And you're like, okay, cool. Not too complicated. But being from this gate of confusion and imagination where my son is, I was like,
Yes.
you bring it. Like let's hear all the
Yeah, like
things.
the weirder, the more I'm going to trust it.
Yeah, I'm like, okay. So yeah, I was fascinated by that, fascinated by like some voice telling this man, I think he was an advertising exec, and then he kind of took a sabbatical and found, and like this whole system kind of came through, and really fascinating person. And then, from there, the gene keys is another system that also uses the 64 gates, but they're called 64 gene keys. And that's Richard Rudd, who's based out of the UK. And he was a friend and student of Rao Huruhu, but kind of took it in a different direction. But it's still using these same I Ching hexagrams. So the basis of it is the Book of Changes, which is a 5,000-year-old book in the archaeological record, that's like a divination practice. And it's basically just about how we as humans can experience the constantly changing world around us. And it's this like beautiful, beautiful poetry that can be really kind of, when I've looked into the I Ching specifically in different translations, it can sometimes seem very patriarchal, or sometimes a little bit too like this is going to happen, like a little too dogmatic perhaps. But when you look even deeper into some earlier translations, if you dig and dig and dig into the history of this book, there's some really beautiful kind of Taoist nature-based interpretations that I tend to really focus on when I do my readings. And it's really about just the seasons of the year and the fact that change is the only constant and that we have to be available to be aware of these changes. So if you look at the human design Rave Mandala, which is you can look at your body graph, but if there's another view that has like a circle around it, and that circle it shows the zodiac, and then around the outside of the zodiac, it shows the 64 gates. And those 64 gates are in a particular order, and it's not 1 through 64, because it's actually just using a different sequence of the I Ching, which is called the Fuxi sequence. And it's a sequence that is named after the original emperor of China from like 3000 BC. And there's another sequence that's 1 through 64, but they don't use that. And so when I first saw these numbers, just a little aside, like when I first saw these numbers and I was into astrology, I was like, what is the correlation between gate 25 and Aries? Like, what is that? And I went to a few different conferences in human design and reached out to some human design people that I knew. And like, nobody could quite answer that for me. They were just like, oh, it just was like, it was just told, it was just how the system came through. But so I did a little more of I'm a one line, which is like the researcher in human design. So I just kept doing my digging and found that it was actually this very ancient sequence of the I Ching, just kind of superimposed onto the zodiac. So that I love it because it feels like the zodiac is ancient wisdom from 5,000 plus years ago from a certain part of the world. And this I Ching is ancient wisdom from another part of the world, but they're both about the cycles of time and how we kind of see the seasons and relate with the seasons as people.
Thank you for taking us on this journey. So, yeah, do you want to dive into the gates of Sagittarius?
Sure.
How do you like to approach it?
Yeah, I know that was a lot of information. It's just, it's just a beautiful, beautiful system when you look at it visually. And through those visuals, I've been able to, I can show you, I'll just show you really quickly if I could, my diagram that I've created that I'm a visual learner. So I just wanted to share this really quickly. Can you see my screen?
Now I can. Yes. Oh, very helpful.
Okay, cool. So this is the human design body graph, as you can see. And basically, the numbers that are inside the body graph are correlated with the numbers on the outside of the zodiac wheel. And each one of them is within a certain sign. And basically, this whole sequence, starting from 25 at the spring equinox, all the way around to 36 at the end of Pisces season, is the original sequence from like 3000 BC of this ancient book. And so in my diagram, I basically just look at one slice of the wheel every week on my podcast. And right now we are entering gate 34 for the beginning of Sagittarius season this week. And we'll be going through 5 more gates until we reach Capricorn season. So there's about 5.5 gates per zodiac season.
Okay.
Yeah.
And maybe if I could get a copy of this, I could like put a link in the show notes and then share that diagram when I do the Instagram post.
Sure, that'd be great because I feel like for me, seeing it makes it make a lot more sense than trying to talk it out. But just know that there are numbers around the wheel that break down to about 5.5 gates per season of the zodiac. And we can dive into, if you're ready, we can dive into Sagittarius.
Yeah, I'm going to get my little notebook out with my pen so I can follow along.
Cool. Yeah. So I started this podcast on the spring equinox on kind of a whim because my partner's an audio engineer and he had a studio and was like, just jump in and like record some stuff. And I was like, I think I want to like I was about to take a class about all of the gates of human design and spend a lot of money on this class and a lot of time that I didn't have because I'm homeschooling my daughter. I just didn't have time. So I was like, I want to learn these gates, but I want to do it through also putting something out. I learn best through speaking, as I've learned about
Mhm.
myself. So I took that advice, my own advice, and was like, okay, I'm gonna just go ahead and start doing this week by week and seeing what comes through in my body, like letting it flow over me and not trying to learn everything all at once, but really just like one gate at a time and see how it relates to the season that I'm currently in.
Oh my
And
gosh,
so
love it.
it's been beautiful. It's been like it's felt like whoa, big epiphanies one after another of just like I can't believe how much that relates to Scorpio and how much that relates to like the snow that's now falling outside and like the actual weather and the actual feeling of the season in addition to the mythologies that I know from these other systems like astrology. So anyway, I'm saying all this because I'm not an expert. I'm not one of those people who could be like, hey, what's gate 27 and like for me to just riff off on it. I'm kind of in this process right now of learning as I go. And
Mhm.
so I kind of look to the month ahead before the month starts, and I'm like, oh, here's a story. Let's see how this is actually going to play out. And so for each of the seasons, I feel like they do, and they have over the course of this past several months told a story. Yeah, so Sagittarius season, I'll just tell you the a list of the gates and see if you can kind of create a storyline, like listeners out there, if you just listen to these and see like, do they sound related to you at all? I don't know. But basically, the first one we start with is gate 34, which is the gate of power.
834 power. And which um center is that?
So that is in the sacral center.
Amazing. I have that one
Oh, nice,
defined.
nice. Me too. Me too. Power up, girl. Yeah, it's known as strength in the I Ching or great or power of the great.
Mm. Oh,
Um, and then we move on to the gate of focus, which is gate 9, and that's also in the sacral center.
okay.
After that, we'll move into the gate of fixed rhythms, also
Ooh.
in the sacral center. There's a lot of sacral energy, like deep energy in Sagittarius, which makes sense. So
And which number is that one?
that's gate 5.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one for me. I have
Oh,
that
nice.
defined.
Okay. I'm curious what planets are in these for you, but we can talk
Oh,
about
yeah.
that after. Yeah. And then after 5, we move to 26, which is the gate of the egoist. It's also known as artfulness or the taming power of the great. And that's in the heart center or the will center.
I see that one. Yeah, I have it defined, but it's not a defined channel for me on that one.
It's a hanging.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
After that, we move to the gate of ideas, gate 11, and that's in the ajna center.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then finally, the last gate it's the end of Sagittarius and the beginning of Capricorn. It's the winter solstice gate, is gate 10, which is the gate of behavior of the self, otherwise known as naturalness in the gene keys. And it is in the G center, the identity center right there in the middle.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're looking at your body graph at this moment. Yeah. If anyone else has that pulled up, yeah, it's fascinating to make note of what gates during a season, so you kind of know what energy is going to come alive for you.
Exactly.
It's really helped me. Like I didn't even realize that I have Jupiter and my conscious and unconscious Uranus in the gate of power, which is starting on Wednesday. So that gate will begin or Thursday, I guess, right when a little bit, yeah, right when Sagittarius season begins. So I was like, oh wow, I'm gonna have like a pretty powerful week ahead, like Jupiter and Uranus, like some wild thing, it brought a whole new meaning for me. And then I was like, oh, okay. And my daughter has 9, and then my partner has 5. And I'm like, oh, that in my family, the next couple of weeks are pretty stacked with like a resonant energy of like people who are familiar with these energies of Sagittarius season. So
Really?
yeah. So if we do it simply and we just say you go through it, I make these little cards, like flashcards,
I love it.
and the gene keys actually is a pretty interesting way to look at these 64 gates. Human design has like one name for it, like power, focus, fixed rhythms. The gene keys has like an evolutionary process associated with each of the 64 gates. So it'll have a shadow level that's kind of all about survival and your fear-based response to the world. And then it'll have a gift level, which is your kind of service level area of life when you kind of reached an understanding and assimilated this energy into yourself and can use it as service. And then there's a city level, which is like when you surrender to the larger picture of what this is all about. And it's like this philosophical and spiritual kind of transcendence. So it's interesting for
Mhm.
me to look at like what I started doing on my birthday was I started to kind of have this shame around confusion, actually, because that was my, in human design, it's the gate of confusion in September. And I was like, I don't want to be confused all the time. You know what I mean? That word just felt like it had power over me. And then I looked at the gene keys, and the shadow was confusion, but the gift was imagination, and the city was illumination. And I was like, oh,
I'll take
I
those.
like those. So I made my little card where I was like, I put it, the shadow side in blue and the gift side in yellow as kind of like shadow and light, and was like able to put it on my altar and flip it around and be like, look at the shadow for a while and be like, okay, how am I grappling with that? So the gate of power, the shadow is force, for example, and like forcefulness. But when you flip it over to the gift level, it's strength. And so power can have both force and strength in it, but it's kind of about how we are utilizing this energy and perceiving it. So there's so much fodder here. There's so much to look at. But if we look at the story of Sagittarius, it goes, yeah, like power to focus, to fixed rhythms, to the egoist, to ideas, to behavior of the self. And
Mm.
I don't know. Does that tell any kind of story to you? Do you feel any kind of like anything coming through and you hear all of that together?
Yeah, I feel like I wonder if what's interesting is that the ajna section, like the mental realm, comes after um the power of the sacral, like lighting you up and running
Mm,
things through your heart, and then coming in. It almost feels like have the experience before you create the dogma, or like create, the hypothesis, or like, rather than like having an idea and then trying to live from that or
totally.
something. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's, but I'm noticing that what, like for power, that's my design Venus. So it must be because in my personality side, and this is a little technical for the folks that are new to human design, but basically in your body graph, it works with your birth time, and but it also works from like 3 months before, right?
Hmm.
The
Yeah.
design side. And so my Pisces placements, and I have Venus and Pisces, on the design side, those are going to be connected to Sag gates, then I guess is
Yeah.
the idea. So
Totally.
I'm realizing as you're talking that that when the sun's moving through the Sag gates, it's going to be activating my design sun, my design Mercury, and my design Venus then,
Totally.
since those connect to the personality side chart placements
Yeah.
in Pisces.
Yes, you got it. Absolutely.
I don't know
Yeah.
what that means.
Yeah, I
But
mean, I find that when the sun or when any planet comes through, yeah, a transiting planet comes through the gates that you already have active, for me, it's similar to like when you're in your, in your season of birth or, and you're just kind of familiar with that. You're like, oh yeah, I know this, my birth season. I understand the, early September, the harvest, the kind of the way the sun looks and the way the plant, what's going on with the plants. Cause there's always been like an attention given to that time of year because it's my birthday, right? And so it's
Mhm.
similar with these gates that we have activated. And the more you know about astrology and your planetary placements, the more you'll kind of also feel that, yeah, that kind of resonance, I guess, is how I've experienced it. I was like, I know this, like I get it, I get this a little bit, and I see maybe a little bit more how it's coming through me.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
my design sun then is that 5.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
really interesting to think about too, in terms
Mm,
of gosh, it's been a while since I've been in a human design space. So my knowledge of the techniques is a little rusty, but design side is unconscious, right?
mhm. Yeah.
So that's another thing you can think about with as the sun moves through the gates is if you're wanting to learn more about what's going on with the unconscious side of our body graph,
Yeah.
you can see what's going on in your life, presumably, as the
Totally. It's
sun
like,
is lighting them up.
yeah, because the sun, I mean, they say in human design that the sun is like your personality sun is like 70% of your experience, which is why I've focused on the sun being like the thing I'm tracking. And also because like it's hard to track too many things at once, but it's a good starting point to say like throughout the course of a year, I'm going to track where the sun is and see if it's lighting up my gates or if it's, if it's empty there for me and what I feel like when my kind of empty part of my chart has the sun in it, like you're getting some energy from the transiting sun there too. But, I just think I'm also a, Leo rising, so the sun is my chart ruler and so I'm like, yes, sun. I'm going to pay homage to the sun by like giving it the kind of reverence that it deserves by being like, yeah, the sun is really important, as far as this body and like what is it doing to me over the course of a year as it goes through all of these micro seasons.
Mhm.
Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned, the unconscious. That's been something that's also is interesting for me coming from the perspective of an astrologer into human design. Was like, well, what's this whole other birth chart? It's like I understand there's my birth chart, but like why 88 days or 88 degrees before my, and what is that? But the way I've looked at it, and this is just me, like don't like quote anybody else on this. But I think, again, I discovered human design when I was pregnant. And so I started noticing that 88 days before, or about 90 days before birth, is the end of the second trimester. So it's kind of that time when you are in the womb pretty fully formed. Like there's no more organs that need to be formed. There's no more, yeah, you're pretty much a fully formed human at that point in the womb at like the end of the second trimester. And so that's the way I look at it is that like what are the planetary influences and neutrino stream that's coming through at that
Yes.
time into the womb. And then so that's like, but you're not conscious yet. You're still in the dark, right? For another 3 months. And then 3 months later you pop out and that's your birth chart. But what human design is doing is taking these 2 points, 2 birth charts essentially, and putting them both onto the wheel of the year and then transposing that into the body graph.
Hmm.
So.
Yeah, and it's this is very expansive too because it goes you can think about the transiting sun not just in terms of what house do I have that sign,
Mhm.
and it's not just the planets that are there because like what I'm seeing, it involves planets based on 88 days before I was born. Um, so it's like Venus at some level expresses for me through gate 34 and my sacral. It's part of my sacral expression. And how does that shift my relationship to the sacral? It's just that you're like completely lighting me up as I'm making all these connections.
I love it. I mean, so that energy is going to be really strong for you. Yeah, over, Thursday through I think next Tuesday is when that gate is active, when the sun is transiting through it. And so you can also break it down even more into a micro season, which is what the lines are. Like you have 5.5 gates per zodiac season. So like 5.5, I say there's 6 because there's usually one on the cusp, but about, 5.5 to 6 per zodiac season. But within each of those gates, there are 6 lines. And that's what the like 1 line or the 5 line or the 4 line comes from, is like which subsection of that gate were you born in? And so, so if you're like, what is your design Venus? It's like a 30.
Let's see. And I can also put it up in case you get information faster with your own eyes.
Oh, cool. Nice.
But
yeah.
So let's see. 34 is 0.5. It's
okay, cool.
5. Mm-hmm.
Great. So yeah, the sun will be transiting through that like over the weekend towards the beginning of next week. Whereas it's going through 1, 2, 3, and 4 lines within 34 before it hits your 5. So you'll feel like that most aligned kind of transit on your Venus when it hits that 5 line. And it always goes in that order, just 1 through 6 throughout the zodiac as well. So it's like 34, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that's a whole, you can get to so many layers with this stuff, but
yes.
Yeah.
And I also has me wondering whether or not you have that gate defined in your body graph, if at some level it could be an experiment to see if you feel like it's defined in that week.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the idea of transits with body graphs? Because I haven't gotten that far in human design.
Yeah, I mean, I think when the sun lights up a gate that you already have active, then there is again that kind of resonance of like, oh, it's my birthday, or it's my Venus day, or this is my Jupiter day. Okay, I feel that. But then there's always that connecting gate within the channels in the body graph. And so if you have like a hanging gate, like you mentioned with gate 5, for example, and it doesn't connect to anything in the body graph, so you don't have the channel, you can look at what the other half of that channel is and see when the sun is transiting through that.
Right.
But then you will have for that week, you'll have a fully defined channel because the transit is lighting it up. It's like, it's helping you to receive that energy that you don't normally have. And that can also happen with other people. Like if you're around a person who has that channel or has a gate that's meeting up with your gate, then there's certain activation of that full energy as well, which is part of that's why they call it the experiment, because it's like you have to really just like play with it. You can't just learn all this stuff. You have to be like, oh wait, okay, who does complete my hanging gate? Like my daughter who just turned 6, she has the full like genius to freak channel, which just happened last full moon on the Taurus full moon. It was the 4323, which is the gate of insight and the gate of assimilation that connect the ajna to the throat together. And so it's a kind of like, as it connects your third eye to your throat, it's this gate that helps you like speak out your epiphanies and either be perceived as a freak because people are like, whoa, that's like ahead of my time, I can't get it. Or it's like wow, that you just spoke something so true, because it's using your insight to speak your truth. And so I have a hanging 23, but I don't have the 43. My daughter has the full channel, so when I'm around her, I definitely feel different in that regard, as far as like what insights are coming through. And then also when the full moon was activating that, I felt like there was this tendency, and a lot of people around me were mentioning that they were like more able to speak their truth during that time than others. So yeah.
How beautiful. Yes. And so week to week on your podcast, you're walking your listeners through the themes, and like how to play with that, along with the astrology and other modalities that you synthesize.
Yeah, I'm kind of at this point right now of like how, as I go forward, how many of these do I want to keep synthesizing? For me, like so I synthesized the indigenous medicine wheel, which is 4 directions, and then the Chinese like Taoist 5 element system that's used in like Chinese medicine and Qigong, because I started studying Qigong a couple years ago, and the teachers were always talking about like, oh, we're in the season of metal. And I'm like, well, we're in the season of Libra. What are you talking? You know what I mean? And I started kind of seeing like, oh, how does metal relate to Scorpio? And, started kind of making parallels between that ancient system and the zodiac. The zodiac's always my like home, North Star kind of home of like what I know the
Mhm.
most about. But then as I started learning about the pagan wheel of the year and the Wuxing Taoist cycle and the medicine wheel and human design and the I Ching, I was like, all of these are really interpretations from cultures across the globe and for millennia of just like accumulated poetry and philosophy and information. And they're all just really speaking about like the time of the year at its essential, most basic, like, when plants are sprouting out of the ground versus when plants leaves are falling and dying. There's like corollaries and parallels between each one of these systems and the season. And then of course you can take that season of in plant life and apply it to like a human life cycle and say like, oh, this is a Aries is a season of infancy and birth and sprouting forward, and Pisces is a season of kind of like post death, like living in the, before you come alive again in the next cycle. So, but a lot of these systems have very similar kinds of, poetry related to this. So,
Living symbols.
mhm.
I would, you had asked me, but I'm curious if you feel like there's a story that's constellating together for you for the Sagittarius gates.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at it's kind of like a story arc through each season that I like to see, like, that it shows that as we travel through a zodiac season, the season itself isn't static. So Sagittarius is associated with, yeah, higher learning and, adventuresomeness and education and travel and, all of these kinds of things with the Centaur Archer. But it's not like a static journey where throughout the entire season it's the same. So I look at it like you said, like, yeah, the sacral gates are in the beginning, which are, power. I think of a centaur's like thighs, and I'm like, power, that is power right there, and strength and force, perhaps. Their centaurs are known as being kind of forceful beings in Greek mythology. And so there's a lot of like all of that there. And then focus is the next one, which I see as like the archer, like pointing your arrow and aiming and shooting requires such focus and determination. And so that
Mhm.
those two, just the first two, when I saw that that's what they were, I was like, oh, amazing. That fits.
Amazing.
It's like the image of this centaur archer is like power and focus, right? And then fixed
Yeah.
rhythms, the next one is like, oh, after the centaur archer shoots his arrow to the horizon, then the fixed rhythm is like that gallop, that like
Oh my
like
gosh, I
heading
love
off,
it.
right? I know. And then the egoist is kind of like, yeah, I don't know, getting to this point of being like, I did that all on my own. I'm not, a baby lamb anymore, and I'm not a scorpion hiding in the corner, and I'm not like, all of the things that have come before in the Wheel of the Year, all of these different archetypes. It's now this like, I am an independent, sovereign being, this centaur archer who can get to the horizon on my own. So there's a bit of egoism that might come in there, right? Like,
Mhm.
like, oh yeah, I got this, I can do this. And then and then after that comes idealism, or the gate of ideas, which I think is like, for me, it tracks with Sagittarius being this philosophical sign and
Mhm.
higher learning, religion, doctrines, dogma, all of that stuff. I think idealism really encapsulates like what that looks like. And then on the cusp of like right before you reach Capricorn, it's the behavior of the self, which is known as naturalness in the, look at my cards. It's known as, yeah, naturalness in the gene keys. And yeah, that one feels like after you've gone through this whole journey of like strength and determination and power, focus, like riding to the horizon, coming up with these lofty ideals, then you kind of come back to like, oh, now this is naturally like in me, and I don't have to like stand on my soapbox and talk about it, but I can just embody that as I enter like the hard work, deepest part of winter on the winter solstice.
Mm, thank you. I love it.
Thanks for entertaining. Yeah, it's so fun to talk it out loud because I've always, just been in my basement studying stuff and putting it all together. And so it's fun to see. It is truly amazing to see how each of the gates within a season can tell a story. And I started noticing that in Aries season right when I started, because Aries was like started with innocence and it kind of made its way to like I can't remember all of them off the top of my head right now, but the first gate of Aries season is innocence, and it just reminded me of a baby lamb. And
Mm,
then from there, seeing it was kind of like endurance, or kind of reminded me of just visually of a growing into a ram that can climb the tallest peaks. And there's like a story in that season. And so I started looking for it and was like, oh, this is very available in every season, this kind of tale of how that archetype might evolve themselves over that time.
hmm. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, what a cool deepening of the wheel of the year to bring in the gates. I mean, it's like I knew from what I was learning that that was where we could go, but I wasn't seeing it represented until I saw you doing it, and that got me so excited. Well,
Oh,
thank
thank
you
you.
for sharing yourself. Is there anything else you wanted to share about like your methods or the podcast or about Sagittarius season that we haven't talked about?
Yeah, let me see. I mean, I would just say, like right now, we're living in such kind of uncertain times, and every day feels like a whole new bit of overwhelm coming through, or just potential, information. And I just feel like it's been interesting continuing this project kind of pre and post election because there's, it just feels like a lot of things have changed as far as the collective energy and collective consciousness, and that totally makes sense that it would. But I kind of love right now that we're entering a new era of Pluto in Aquarius today as we speak, actually. And I love that with that major transformation of energy, we're also entering Sagittarius season this week and having a really like more grounded understanding of the evolution of Sagittarius in my head now and in my body. I would just invite everyone to kind of like embody Sagittarius this season as much as you can, as far as like, there's of course the egotistical part that is in there, or like the getting up on your high horse part of Sagittarius, which I know you've worked to unshame in your own, but I do think that there's so much need for power and focus and fixed rhythms. Like even just these first three gates right now, it feels like a call to action almost, of just like trust your own power, trust your ability to know what it is you want and where you're going to point that arrow and just shoot it. And then, know that you don't have to get there immediately. You don't have to time travel to wherever you shot your arrow, but getting into a kind of a certain rhythmic way of getting there. Yeah, I guess that's what I would say about this season, is just like taking it to heart for myself. That's what I'm doing.
I love a picture of like um just like droves of big-hearted, mystical artists and dreamers with their bow and arrow galloping, in their power.
Yeah.
and ready to focus what they want to give their attention to and give their gifts to. And it's very inspirational at a collective level to me to like reframe this from a picture of like bullying or like dull-headed centaurs to like more of a chironic model that is out there serving the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I love, yeah, just a bunch of Chiron and friends
Chiron and
galloping together.
friends.
Yeah, the wound is where the light gets in, right? And we're wounded now, so let's let in all that light. And,
Chiron and Friends needs to be a TV show, like immediately.
Can we please? I love that. A live action. Yeah. I would watch. I would definitely watch.
Well, thank you so much. Do you want to share how people can find you and like any offerings that you have right now that you would like to highlight?
Definitely, yeah. So, yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Cycles of Time Podcast or astro.somatics. So, astrosomatics is my business name. I do breathwork and kind of embodiment coaching, as well as kind of bringing that into the cycles of time and the astrology. So, I'm about to launch a new website, hopefully by the time this is live. That's astrosomatics.com. And so you can find my offerings there. And yeah, it'll vary what it is. I'm not exactly sure at this moment, but yeah, I'd love to connect with y'all out there. So
amazing. Well, thank you so much, Allyson.
thank you, Britton. This has been lovely.
Thank you, Allyson. That was so fun. And I loved that we were doing this as Pluto was entering Aquarius. Listeners, if you enjoyed connecting with Allyson's voice, please check out the show notes where I have a link to her podcast, Cycles of Time, as well as her Instagram and all the other details that you might wish to find for connecting with Allyson. Thank you all so much for listening and wishing you a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful Sag season. And little request here, if you love this podcast and you have not written a review, I am inviting you to do so right now. It is so helpful in bringing people to this space and helping people trust that to try it out, like experiment with this. Well, maybe this will be helpful to me. Even just a few words, just one sentence can make a really big difference from moon to moon. Thank you so much for that and take care.